This lecture provides an overview of the history of ancient Egyptian civilizations. When studying the history of Egypt, we should keep in mind the important role that geography has played in the evolution of its history. The Nile being one of the most important features of the geography of ancient Egyptian civilizations, even today very important. It was an important source of trade routes. Egypt also benefited from having deserts to the east and west of their territory, which helped to defend them from invasion. This isolation, however, did contribute to a sense of safety that Egyptians had, for good or for bad. When invaders did arrive, they were ill-prepared, but for much of their history, they didn't have to worry so much about large forces invading them. The climate also, geography in Egyptian history played an important role by preserving artifacts for us to study today. The Greek philosopher and historian Herodotus referred to Egypt as the gift of the Nile, meaning that without the cyclical flooding bringing fresh silt and nutrients to the soil, there wouldn't be an Egyptian civilization. The Nile River itself played an important role in the social stability of Egyptian society due to its predictability. Almost to the day, you could predict when the Nile would flood. The Nile also was a spur for the development of sophisticated irrigation systems. As we mentioned in the previous slide, important for trade, important for communication, and also important for political unity as well. The Nile served as a dividing line between the lands of the living and the lands of the dead. The east, the land of the sunrise, was the land of the living. This is where cities and temples predominantly were built. To the west of the Nile was considered the land of the dead, and tombs, funerary monuments would typically be built to the west. This is not, exclusively the case, but the farther west you go, the closer, in the eyes of the Egyptians, to the land of the dead you became. Egyptian religion was omnipresent throughout Egyptian life. This was a polytheistic religion with as many as 2,000 gods at different times. The pharaoh was the embodiment of a god. He was a sort of living god at different times, and at other times he was more of a conduit to the gods. There was a significant amount of interaction between religion and the environment, and the symbolism there, the daily rebirth of the sun, the yearly rebirth of the Nile. So geography, climate, and religion are all sort of intertwined. There was kind of an evolution over time with regard to the afterlife, from the old to the middle to the new kingdom eras, and we'll get to those in a little bit later in the presentation, on who actually got to go to the afterlife. And over time, more and more people sort of became eligible to go to the afterlife, but early on only elites went. That was the belief. One of the most important of the Egyptian gods, Osiris, was the god of the dead, but in a sense of rebirth. There was a tradition involved with the weighing of the heart, this symbolic gesture in which the lighter the heart would be, the fewer sins or evil this person had perpetrated. Initially, Osiris was more of a local god in the Nile Delta region. Gradually became a regional god, and then eventually became an important sort of national god. In death, the pharaoh became Osiris. Another important Egyptian god, Horus, the god of balance, the god of harmony, controlled the flow of the Nile and the fertility of the soil. In life, it was believed that Pharaoh was Horus. Amun-Ra is another important god, although at different times lesser and at different times greater in importance. Believed to be self-created, did not have a mother and a father. He rose in prominence, Amun-Ra, after the city of Thebes led a revolt against the invading Hyksos. He was the patron god of Thebes. So this kind of catapulted Amun-Ra to an important place in the pantheon of Egyptian gods. Many modern observers wonder why the Egyptians built pyramids. I mean, they are impressive structures. The Egyptian belief in the afterlife demanded that human bodies, be interred whole or buried whole. They also believed that the people needed material goods in the afterlife, so you needed a larger place to store these things. They needed to protect the bodies of those they buried, so these would be good burial tombs. One of the most famous of the Egyptian pyramids is the Great Pyramid of Giza that you see pictured here. Was built as a funerary monument for the pharaoh Khufu. The orientation of this pyramid is almost exactly north, south, east, and west. So the Egyptians were very cognizant of compass directions at this time. 2.3 million blocks, about 500 feet high, about 20 years to build. Interestingly, the average block weighs about 2.5 tons, and some of these blocks weighed up to 9 tons. And it's believed that a system of ramps were used, and perhaps logs used to roll the stones to where they needed to be. This is a diagram of a typical pyramid, showing you the entryways, the different rooms within the pyramid, and the ways in which the pyramid would be ventilated. Here are pictures of a collection of Egyptian pyramids. Westerners are very fascinated with the Egyptian procedure of mummification. We don't know exactly when it started, but certainly by the era of the New Kingdom, this was widely in practice. Embalmers would use salts, particularly a salt called natron, N-A-T-R-O-N, to remove moisture from the body. Once the body was dried, mummies would be anointed with oil and perfumes. Natron dries the body up much faster than any other substance, including sand, leading to very good preservation. The pharaoh was both the earthly ruler as well as a religious ruler of the Egyptians. The word pharaoh means great house, and it originally referred to the king's palace. At least in theory, the pharaoh wielded complete control of the land and its resources, and ruled as an absolute monarch. At times there were weaker and stronger pharaohs. His roles included being supreme military commander as well as head of government. He would delegate to administrative matters to a person known as the vizier, V-I-Z-I-E-R, much like a modern-day prime minister, who acted as pharaoh's representative. The vizier would coordinate land surveys, run the treasury, handle building projects, oversee the legal system and the archives. Pharaohs typically, especially early on, built cities without walls, and in a way this was sort of boastful. It was a way to say, I am so powerful that no one would dare to invade my city. Now in a modern sense it seems foolish not to build walls or to build defenses, but if you can pull this off, I guess more power to you. Although Egyptians recognized pharaohs to be human, at least in a human form, and subject to human weakness, simultaneously pharaohs were viewed as gods, because divine power of kingship would be incarnate within the pharaoh. The pharaohs served as intermediaries between the Egyptians and their gods. Over time, though, pharaohs began to be seen as a little less powerful than they had been in earlier times. The pharaohs had ceremonies in which they would sort of summon the Nile flooding each year. And like the modern calendars, very, very close in time, 365-day calendar. Temples, however, were not just places of worship. They were kind of the backbones of the economy. They were responsible for collecting and storing the nation's wealth with a system of granaries and treasuries administered by overseers who redistributed grain and goods. In terms of the social structure, the upper class of Egyptian society was often called the white kilt class, based on the bleached linen garments that they wore. However, most Egyptians, 80 to 90%, depending on the time period, were peasant farmers. And the Egyptian economy really revolved around agriculture. Egyptian farmers led fairly harsh lives, somewhat but not completely like serfdom, which we will talk about in later lectures, European serfdom. Most Egyptians, again, were agriculturalists. They grew a wide variety of crops ranging from barley and flax to lentils, onions, beans, and millet. Granary officials and tax collectors calculated yields, so they would survey a land and base the tax upon what they believed should have been the proper yield. Typically, farmers were not free and did not own land. They would be paid in food and clothing and shelter and clothing. They would, in addition, work on irrigation or construction projects as need be. And the lives of Egyptian farmers remained relatively unchanged for over 4,000 years. In terms of architecture, everyday buildings like homes and government structures have not survived for the most part. Many Egyptian towns have disappeared because they were situated near the cultivated area of the Nile Valley, and thus during times of flood, as the riverbed rose, they would be buried. Egyptians also, for ordinary buildings, used mud bricks, which would either be dissolved by the water and the flooding, or used later by peasants as fertilizer. Important structures such as temples and tombs, intended to last forever, would be constructed of stone instead of bricks. Egyptian temples aligned with astronomically significant events such as solstices and equinoxes. Hieroglyphs, or hieroglyphic writing, is the type of writing system developed by the Egyptians. This is a written language that doesn't use vowels, so it would be similar to languages that would evolve later, such as Hebrew and Arabic, that do not write the vowels down, Semitic languages. For a long time, we as Westerners didn't understand the hieroglyphs, and it wasn't until actually the era of Napoleon that we discovered how to interpret and read hieroglyphs. The Rosetta Stone was uncovered in 1799 by one of the soldiers accompanying Napoleon Bonaparte on an expedition to Egypt, and there were two Egyptian scripts and a Greek script. So the Rosetta Stone was sort of a key that allowed us to decipher hieroglyphic writing. This is a picture of the Rosetta Stone. Egyptian artwork is very concerned with a sense of order and balance. Most ancient Egyptian art served both political and religious purposes, and especially to reinforce the social hierarchy. Many artistic pieces were created to protect Egyptians in the afterlife, and size is very important to Egyptian artists. As you can see in this image, the pharaoh on the far right is the largest person, and the smaller the people are in the depiction, the less important they are in terms of social hierarchy. For the purposes of this lecture, we're going to divide up Egyptian history into just 3 periods: the Old Kingdom, the Middle Kingdom, and the New Kingdom. The Old Kingdom, Egyptian pharaohs were very much like gods, sort of omnipotent. This is a time of relative peace for Egypt, and the nation of Egypt, as it became the Kingdom of Egypt, developed during this time period. There's a sense of an Egyptian identity. Menkaure II is considered the first Middle Kingdom pharaoh. This is a time of relative affluence in Egyptian society. The funerary cult of Osiris began to dominate popular religion during the Middle Kingdom. There was something of a decline in the authority of the pharaoh during this time. The capital city moved south to Upper Egypt, that would be Upper Nile, of Thebes, Thebes. In terms of public improvements, there were numerous swamps that were drained. A canal was built to the Red Sea during this time period. Tombs were used instead of pyramids at this time period, which provided better protection for mummies. They're much more difficult to see than a large pyramid. The Hyksos invasion marked the end of the Middle Kingdom. This map shows the major cities in the region at the time of the Middle Kingdom and the directions by which invading forces attacked the Egyptians. The New Kingdom was Egypt's most prosperous time and marked the peak of its imperial power. During this time, Egypt attained its greatest territorial extent. It expanded south into Nubia. It held territories in the Near East, modern-day Syria. The pharaohs were buried in a geographic area known as the Valley of the Kings during this time period. The economy in the New Kingdom, much more militaristic and imperialistic in nature. This is a time in which the Egyptians incorporated chariot, bronze working, and horses into their military and economic ventures. It featured the development of a professional army. It's noted for the expansion of external trade by sending commercial expeditions, but the economy was also weighed down in many ways by the cost of military expeditions. Amenhotep IV represented a significant change in political and religious traditions in Egypt during the time. He had changed his name later in life to Akhenaten, or It Is Well with Aten, the god of the sun disk. During this time, Akhenaten closed the temples of other gods, but his goals were as much religious as they were political. He wanted to lessen the power of the priestly class in the city of Thebes, the priests of Amun-Ra. He also moved the capital, the Egyptian capital, once again. The new capital, Amarna, was dedicated to the new religion of worship to the Aten. And again, this is another way to break up the power of the priest class of Amun-Ra, and also to put some distance between Thebes, the former capital, and that power base of priests, and Akhenaten himself. Nefertiti was Akhenaten's wife. Her name translates as the beautiful one has come. She and Akhenaten led a movement toward monotheism, an almost complete rejection of the polytheistic traditions of Egyptian. But this again was in part a political move against the priests of Amun-Ra. She may have been equal in power to the pharaoh, and we have never found her mummy. This next image is a depiction of the bust of Nefertiti, a 3,300-year-old painted limestone sculpture. This is an extremely popular work of art. It's been copied many times. It dates to 1345 BCE. It was discovered by a German archaeological team in 1912, and it's currently on display at the Neues Museum in Berlin. Egypt is demanding the repatriation of Nefertiti, the original bust of Nefertiti. There's some mystery about the left eye of Nefertiti here. We're not quite sure if the artist didn't finish it, or if there's some sort of symbolism to only having one eye fully deformed. Or it is possible that Nefertiti, this is an accurate depiction of Nefertiti. The problem with that theory is that there's no written evidence to confirm or deny that missing left eye theory. This is a postage stamp of the German government, which again underscores this fascination that Berliners in particular and Germans in general have with Nefertiti. One of the most famous of Egyptian pharaohs, again during the New Kingdom, is Tutankhamen. He returned to the official worship of Amun, led the abandonment of Amarna, and returned the capital to Thebes. He had some success in rebuilding the economy and Egyptian power. Very young when he died, probably some combination of septicemia from a broken leg and malaria caused his death. Because he was of such a young age, this meant burial in the tomb of a lesser person, of a noble, which resulted in preservation. Another famous New Kingdom pharaoh, widely considered one of the greatest and most powerful of pharaohs, is Ramses II, who, if my math is correct, had about a 66-year reign. Something like 90 to 100 children, we believe he had. At least 7 wives and an unknown number of mistresses. Led expansion to the north, south, and the east. He lived to be about 90 years old. His death, however, brought chaos because many thought the world would end. And if you think about this, at a time when the average Egyptian probably lived to be about age 40, his 66-year reign represented 1.5 lifetimes. So many people had been born and died during his reign, and the idea that this god king would be gone was very frightening to people. His body was discovered in 1881, and it's now on display in the Cairo Museum. And here we're going to be very quiet because he looks like he's still sleeping, is Ramses II today. And this winds up our brief overview of Egyptian civilizations.